Welcome to the Environmental Leadership Chronicles, a podcast brought to you by the California Association of Environmental Professionals. In this episode, we feature David Hodgins, the founder and CEO of Sustento Group and executive director of the Los Angeles Better Buildings Challenge. With more than a decade of experience in project development, program delivery, and policy implementation, David is a recognized leader in the sustainable real estate field. He began his career with the Clinton Climate Initiative, where he led private sector project development for 3 years. Building on the perspective he gained through that work, he founded sustainability services company, Sustento Group, in 2011, which serves as program manager for the Los Angeles Better Buildings Challenge. David has contributed to the development of a range of industry standards and resources, including the Department of Energy's Asset Score Audit template and the BOMA Energy Performance Contracting Toolkit. We really enjoyed our time with David. Thanks for listening and hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, I'm Jessa.
And I'm Laurel, and today's guest is David Hodgins with Sustento Group. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's 11/11/22. You launched your business in 2011. The stars are aligning. 22 years ago, you launched this business. That said, let's start as we always do. How are you
12 years ago. 11.
12?
Wait.
11.
10, 11. Oh,
We're
11
not
years ago.
mathematicians here. Yeah.
We are not hired to be mathematicians. We are podcast producers at the moment. But with that, this is fun. Tell us about how you are or are not connected to AEP.
Well, we're not members. I've been aware of AEP's work, and my background is in development, but my career has focused on existing buildings and retrofitting existing buildings to save energy, save water, incorporate more renewable energy, and so I have not been as directly involved with AEP, but I appreciate you having me anyway.
Yes, and hopefully you will get more involved. Yeah, we want to extend our reach, broaden our reach. Like me, for example, I'm a developer. I am in the renewable energy and energy storage space. So there are developers that are members of AEP, and there are LEED certified folks that are members of AEP. And so I'm so glad that we can use this platform to engage. We've been really excited to have somebody come and talk about all the things that you do. But let's start with, how did you, why a career in this field? How did you start?
Yeah, I think it was always there. I mean, I grew up in San Diego, going to the beach, going to the zoo, going to SeaWorld. My dad was a big waterman, scuba diver. And so I always had, a real connection to nature, but, growing up in the 80s, watching Captain Planet, I kind of took it for granted, I think, and when I grew up, I wanted to swim with the orcas, be one of the guys, surfing on Shamu and maybe be a marine biologist and just share the love. Right. Then, got into school, didn't really know what I wanted to do. My dad was pretty clear that I would study business, or he would disown me. So I did. Got out of school, didn't really know what I wanted to do. Felt a little bit like a fraud. And all the cool kids were going into commercial real estate. So I thought, oh, try that. And that was in 2002, which was a very tough time. I don't know if you remember or followed that, to be trying to get into commercial real estate. So I took on a few jobs, waiting tables, working in hotels, and ended up moving to Colorado. It was supposed to be just for a winter, I'm going to go snowboard, have fun, and then try again. And I ended up completely falling in love with the place and really, saw this is nature. I thought I knew, but this is nature. This is what, and this needs to be here. This needs to be here forever. And I need to do whatever I can to protect that. And I didn't let go of the real estate thing, ended up getting a job working for a developer out here who was doing low impact development, it was called at the time, since before green was a thing. And so that opened up my eyes a little further to see that, oh, you can do development for good, right? And then I was living in Aspen at the time. It's a small town, and was sitting on a good GMAT score, and decided to go back to school. So I came back to LA, went to USC to do my MBA and a master's in real estate development. But I knew at that point that I wanted to be in green buildings. And this was when LEED was very new. I helped get, Rick Fedrizzi to USC talking about green buildings. I ended up leading the first USC Alumni Association event focused on sustainability, which I started out terrified of public speaking. And then I was up in front of 400 people. And I got a chance I thought I would go in-house for one of the big four property management companies or a developer. And that was my idea. And, every time I raised my hand in class, I was like, oh, what's, Hodgins going to say? They already knew. And got my lead AP, way back then. And then as I was preparing to graduate, I got an email. And it was an opportunity for a fellowship with the Clinton Climate Initiative. And I had seen President Clinton keynote at Greenbuild in, I think it was 2007, talking about this idea of retrofitting buildings and using those energy savings to essentially fund the work, right? So like mining this new resource, and it just, I became obsessed and thinking about, where could I have an impact? It shifted from new construction to existing buildings, because 90+%, depending on, whose figures you follow or what market you're looking at, of the buildings that will be here in the relevant time frame for us to do anything about all this are here now. So I got the fellowship. There's a pattern, 1 year turned into 4. I got to travel a lot, work internationally, work in lots of different cities in the US. And then in 2011, 2010 timeframe, the last big infusion of federal dollars came into the space, the Reinvestment and Recovery Act. So I had, through my work at CCI, developed really good relationship with then Mayor Villaraigosa's office. And so when they got this big chunk of money, they brought me in and my colleagues in to say, how can we use this strategically? How can we, build programs instead of, projects? And so that was a super amazing opportunity to take everything that I had been learning, out of a fire hose for 4 years at CCI, and go from kind of project and portfolio level work to city scale programs. And I was fortunate to be, offered an opportunity towards the end of those grants to come on as a consultant and basically bring together 3 programs that I had designed with the Recovery Act, and roll that into what became the LA Better Buildings Challenge. And the Better Buildings Challenge was brand new at that point, and didn't look back. It was just me to start out. Now we're up to 12 people, and it's been a decade that I've been doing this work, essentially getting paid to experiment and fail and experiment and fail and experiment and fail, and succeed, but to try things and to work kind of at this edge between public and private sectors. So I'm funded by the utility to work with commercial real estate and work with multifamily real estate. So it's been a really interesting and fun path, right? I kind of made it my job essentially, and just kind of kept identifying opportunities and ways forward and partnerships and putting, resources together to keep it moving, even when my funders and clients maybe weren't ready. So we've been through a few different mayoral, transitions. We're going through another one now, as you may know. And so it's been a great ride.
Yeah, I mean, I hope this story inspires a lot of our listeners who many are students and young, and I've talked to a lot of them where they feel like they're going to school and they got to get their MBA because it's or they got to get their business degree because it's practical. But kids these days, they do want to study environmental work and they want to get a profession in the industry. And what's jumping out from your story to me is this entrepreneurial kind of industrious attitude that you've had where there's grant funding, there's a problem, here's a project, I'm going to do this, I'm going to spearhead this, we're going to collaborate, create partnerships. And out of that work, you've been able to launch a business because they saw your expertise, they saw your enthusiasm, you had great ideas, you were putting programs together. That's how you can self-fund, is grants, really. Like when the money is put out there and you have an idea, bring partners together, create this project or program, and then do that. That's how I got some of my early jobs too. And I just want to encourage people that are listening, like, even if there's not a salary description, like a salary job posting on LinkedIn that says we need this thing, like you can create a job for yourself if you're creative enough. And I believe our future is. And that said, like, why Sustento? What does that mean? And what's your business culture and your values and all that? I know that you mentioned Aspen and how you're like, I got to save this. But let's talk about the business a little bit.
Yeah, well, the name, and I applaud you for pronouncing it correctly. It's not one that rolls off the tongue always for everybody, but that's my 8th grade Latin coming into play, and also my dad, is a big reader of the Stoics, right? And so Sustento is Latin for to sustain. I sustain, and so. So that's where that comes from. And I said group, even though it was just me at the time, because, I envisioned that it would grow. Not that I necessarily wanted to be, a boss or an employer. I'm not great at administrative things. And a lot of the parts that come with running a business, I've had to do it. But that it would be this network. And that's what it's evolved into. In addition to growing our staff. So that's the origin of the name. I forgot the second part of the question.
Like your mission and core values and the culture.
So our tagline is that we empower market leaders to decarbonize the built environment. And, we do have within that, core values, and a lot of that's about fit, right? Mission fit. I mean, this is a lot of like blue ocean work that we do. And I'm not a big fan of just selling people what they want. And maybe that's not a great business model, but it's the one that I have and seem to be stuck with. So I like to be out and developing new things. Like you said, where do I see the inefficiencies? Where do I see the disconnects, and where, if there was a catalyst to bring that together? And, I joke that we're, that we're multilingual, right? We speak real estate, we speak policy, we speak technology, we speak, we speak environmental. And so, it's people that are comfortable in that kind of blue ocean space that see the connections between things. And, I give my people a lot of freedom, within that to create and to suggest. And so we take, ideas from anyone on the team, and we never keep doing something just because we've been doing it that way. And I drive some people crazy, and they don't all stay. But I'm really fortunate, to have a core team that stayed with me for, double-digit years at this point, a lot of them. And So it's that creativity. We call ourselves like hippies in suits, right? So we are presenting, right, working within the sort of economic, social model that we all are kind of born into, but we're trying to change it. We're trying to change it from within. And so those are the kinds of people that, I enjoy working with, and that I think enjoy working with me.
And it's obviously an attractive culture, because I was looking at some of your highlight projects, and one is the LA Existing Buildings Energy and Water Efficiency Ordinance. And a lot of our members, this is what we do. We write long range plans, we write zoning codes, ordinances that are related to reducing environmental impact from the start, instead of waiting until, your CEQA analysis is complete. And then you're like, oh, I have all these impacts. It's like, just reduce the impacts at the start. And I worked for the County of San Diego when their green building ordinance was like top of the line, and all new buildings needed to be LEED Platinum and all that. So tell us about this LA ordinance. Why is it different? Why is it unique? Why was it meaningful for you? Why is it a showcase for you?
Yeah. Well, I started doing this work before there was, right, any kind of policy driver. There was some awareness, and LA and the private sector in LA got to give a lot of credit. LA has been the #1 Energy Star city ever since EPA started tracking that. That said, I was out there developing projects and showing people, implementable, I thought very compelling opportunities in their buildings. And a lot of it was not getting done. Right. And folks are busy. The stuff is not super simple. And so how does it, rise to the level of priority that it actually gets the attention and it gets the resources? And so I thought the policy piece was really what was missing. I had worked a lot on finance models and business models and innovating all of these things. And why aren't people getting it? I'm a very logical, person. And if I could just explain it, won't everybody see? Well, turns out, it doesn't work that way. And it can, even in our relationships, right? So the policy piece was really important. And that's maybe another example of my kind of personal approach. A lot of cities, face some of the same issues, right? They're resource constrained. The stuff is complicated. So how to do it? And so,
well, Dave, I want to pop in there, because we've said complicated, I think 2 times, and I saw it on your website that these things are complicated. And I just want to reiterate, it's really hard to have these conversations and put things in a business case when it's so complicated and interconnected and interrelated ideas and strategies. And if you change one thing, it has cascading ramifications for all these other things. And before you move on, how do you communicate complexity in a simple way so that something like an ordinance like this can get passed? What's your communication strategy in trying to simplify something that is very complicated?
Yeah. I mean, I struggle with this all the time. I think a lot about communication. But I think that a lot of it comes down to standards and trust, right? Branding. We don't analyze every single decision to death the way that we do building retrofits, right? Because, for example, if you're going to buy a building, right, you hire an environmental firm to do an environmental review. You would hire an appraiser to come up with opinions of value, and there are standards that are followed. And so the investors look to those reports and say, okay, I get it. And we can then transact. We need and are starting to have, and these policies help to put in place similar standards for these types of projects, so that you don't have to become an expert in every single facet of this, to be able to move forward. So I think that's, a really important theme. And then, how to make it simple is that I try to adjust the message to who I'm talking to, speak to the listening. And there's a lot of different ways to kind of get to the outcome that aren't necessarily the front door, just this rational, sort of this and that. There are a lot of reasons to do this work, right? There are a lot of reasons to do this work. And so part of it gets to say, that this is intuitively there, right? There are standards there. And then putting it into the language that resonates for those folks. But it's a challenge. We're building a new website right now, which is a resource hub. We're calling it Retrofit LA. So it's a new rebrand of the website that it sounds like you saw, which is our resource center for all the 12,000 or so buildings that are covered by LA's ordinance. And that is the task. That is the task, is to make this simple. And part of it is creating tools. Like, for example, LA's ordinance. It's like an LSAT logic test, trying to figure out how this applies to your building. What should I do, by when, who, and all of that. So we just launched a tool that was a kind of a brainchild of mine that it's really gratifying to see it out there now. I would call it the Navigator. And it is a decision tool like TurboTax for ordinance compliance. And so you can, it reduces complexity on all sides. It reduces complexity for the utility. It reduces complexity for the city. It reduces complexity for the owner, because we basically hard coded what the ordinance says into like English, normal language, and phrased the questions in a way that somebody can go through it and just answer them off the top of their heads. And it recommends a compliance path and runs calculations internal to it and stuff, and then gives you a customized little plan for your building, links directly to the incentive programs. And then we follow up, and that's all automated. And so for, the 70% or so of the buildings that are covered by this ordinance that qualify for like free programs that will come and do your lighting, do an HVAC tune-up, do a lot of cool, water efficiency measures, they can get connected directly to those programs, understand how that fits, by when they need to do it. And we don't have to train anyone on how to guide them through those conversations, because it's all hard-coded into this self-driven software tool, for example.
I love this. Oh my gosh. I have so many questions and comments, but this Navigator sounds amazing. And I love when people can take something, and I mean, scientists and environmentalists, I think, are really good at this typically, is taking something very complex and simplifying it. And so reacting to what you just said with this Navigator is, how will people find out about it? Like, that this tool is available?
Yeah. Well, we work very closely with the Department of Building and Safety, who are the enforcers, right, of the ordinance. And then you've got to go at least 3 or 4 different places to get through this whole process, which also we've simplified into a single benchmarking guide with screenshots of every single step in the process. So what was 4 different processes, all now one. But both utilities, DWP and SoCalGas, point to us, point to the Navigator. DBS, Building Safety, points to the Navigator. So they're aware, they get that this is saving them work. It's, increasing the likelihood of projects actually happening. And so because of COVID, there's an ongoing state of emergency that's continued in the city. So the ordinance is not being enforced, but when it is, we'll be pushing that out. And we also, on the simplification point, who do I hire? I'm supposed to get an energy audit and water audit and retro commissioning. What even is that? So we've developed, how do I benchmark my building? So we run requests for qualifications, And we take on the job of checking references, checking licensure, checking that these firms actually have a presence in LA. And then we create a directory so that when someone says, who do I hire? Right, here's a list, and it's alphabetized. But so those firms that are listed in our directories become spokespeople as well. And so, yeah, we'll be pushing that out more as things open up. But for now, it's online and it's there. And for people that want to be proactive, which we recommend that they do, because of TikTok, it's there.
And is this under Better Buildings Challenge or Sustento Group?
So I should probably explain that. So my firm, Sustento Group, so I started back in 2011, is hired by, we have a contract with the LA Department of Water and Power to run this program called the LA Better Buildings Challenge. And that started out as a leadership initiative for what I like to call LA's best buildings. So that's buildings that are already doing stuff. They already are saving energy, but we can invest technical assistance and other resources to help kind of spin a flywheel, right? When the policy part came online, and I was pretty, heavily involved in getting that done, in front of and behind the scenes, the city needed help, right? They are not experts in Energy Star. They're not experts in audits and retrocommissioning. So even though they put out this policy, it's like they didn't really know what it was or how to help people, what they were really asking people to do. And so because all of that was already part of our scope of work for Better Buildings, it was kind of logical to expand our scope to include this ordinance support. So that did stretch our resources, which also, forced me to think hard about how do we provide a level of service? How do we provide, the support for this thing to be successful? Because, I had been trying to do all of this work without the policy, and it was just so hard that this must work, right? And so that's where the navigator came from, was, we have to leverage technology, right? We can't, no one can afford, and it's not efficient anyway, to have a call bank, where you're having one-on-one conversations with every single building. And we've done the math, and it would be quite expensive. So that is, how that kind of evolved and kind of forced me to think about how we could leverage technology to help this work and not kind of implode, on arrival.
I hope that other jurisdictions across California and the US are listening, because as a developer, and I'm a regulatory specialist, so I understand policy and regulations and the interconnectedness of all the things, and that's why I have a job. But if we were to add technology onto our long-range planning efforts, our general plans, our community plans, our zoning ordinances, our land use policies, so that developers could have a clear pathway, it would add a little more certainty to the development process, which is all investors really want. They want certainty. They want a commercial operation date that they can rely on and work backwards from that in terms of funding and all of that. And I'm inspired because, having worked in zoning ordinances that are massive and trying to match up, okay, now what does the developer do? Now what does the developer do? Who do they need to talk to? It's exhausting. And that's why people complain about California. Building in California is so hard. Mm-hmm. And I want to applaud you because thank you. That is really helpful for environmental consultants, environmental professionals, public agency members, developers. Every aspect of development is supported when you can find a more streamlined way of implementing a regulation. And it's one thing to make the regulation, which is a process in itself, and then to implement it in a way where the public isn't so exhausted they just give up. I want to highlight that. And also, we talked offline, but you've got other projects in the pipeline that are really big, and it's going to make a really big influential impact. Share with us another example.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned technology, so I'll take the opportunity to plug another resource that we recently launched in our last webinar, talked about, which is our technology directory. So similarly to trying to figure out an ordinance, how do I comply with this ordinance? Now that it's kind of in the zeitgeist, right? Like ESG is a thing now. There's pressure on to get to net, how soon are we going to get to net zero? When can we make a commitment? And then what are all the technologies that will actually help us do that? And it's a good thing, but there's this whole kind of inundation that happens with vendors and technology companies. So people can just shut down and they don't know what's real on the technology side. And so we created this directory in partnership with the U.S. General Services Administration, the biggest landlord, in the country, and they've got all the national labs behind them, leveraging a long-running platform that they have called the Green Proving Ground, where they're using their purchasing power and all of their technical horsepower to test and vet and deploy and pilot different technologies in federal buildings. And then they publish their findings about how those go. But because they're the federal government, they can't say who they used. They can say what they did, what the results were. But if I want to go then and copy that, they can't tell me who to actually talk to. So I can say who to talk to. And so by partnering with them, we're able to kind of pierce the veil, if you will, and put those companies front and center when created little profiles with videos and case studies and things. We also worked with a large venture capital fund, the biggest VC in the clean tech space, called Fifth Wall, and they're also based in LA. So they're investing into technology companies that are earlier stage than what would be ready to go into a GSA or other government facility. But just another area that needs simplification and a way of piggybacking and bringing together kind of best practice that others are doing in a way that's not a huge lift for us, but is useful for everyone. So that's another thing that is live. Before we got on, though, I was talking about, it's an interesting time. We're recording, during COP27, mm-hmm. and also, all these rumblings about the Inflation Reduction Act, which, doesn't sound like it has anything to do with energy, probably intentional, in the naming of it. But there's a lot of money in there for climate and for state and local and tribal governments and community lenders, nonprofits to bring more resources specifically to low-income communities, because they're the most impacted by climate change. They're the most impacted by poor air quality. They're living in the lowest quality, most under-maintained housing. And I grew up, in apartments like that. And so it's very personal. And so we are doing a couple of things in that area. One is we are piloting new approaches to develop holistic building retrofits, and that is rehab, so health and safety and habitability, plus decarbonization. And we built a financial model that really looks at all of this, because there's a lot of competing goals there. We want to decarbonize, we'll also save money. Well, the fact is, electricity costs more than gas right now. So if you even can electrify your building, in many cases, the bills to the tenants are not going to go down. And some people may fight me on this, and there's different studies, but in our experience, that's generally true. And when you add the rehab needs, which is the first priority, Maslowian, right, hierarchy
survive,
of
live first.
if you talk to an affordable housing developer, their mission is not to provide decarbonized housing. Their mission is to provide safe, affordable housing. So they're going to push back on anything that results either in more upfront cost or investment, more regulatory stuff to deal with. And especially if the result of that is going to be an increase in operating costs to themselves and their tenants. So we need to find ways to bring in new money. And the beautiful thing, and it's being studied around the country, and it's been studied pretty well in single family, where you've got people that participate in surveys and have the money to retrofit their houses. But is this nexus between human health, public health, and decarbonization and rehab. That has not been studied in low-income multifamily. And so we are doing that. And I think that there's an opportunity to bring in health-focused capital that sees a return on investment in the health outcomes that result from this work. We're also, as part of this, and I know this is a little bit complicated, but to make the math work to where you're getting the holistic project done that's producing these health outcomes and getting, the rehab plus decarb, even with the incentives, the math doesn't work. If the goal is to reduce bills or keep bills flat for tenants, and not put some kind of undue, unfair burden on the landlord. So there's a need for public subsidy. And we are quantifying that on a per project basis. And then we can extrapolate from that to what would the need be citywide. Mm-hmm. So the other big, thing that's happening, I talked about the IRA is there's money in there for this. And so we're working with partners to put together an application to go after some of that. And I have a pretty strong conviction that LA needs a green bank, a nonprofit green bank that can blend capital from private, philanthropic, and public sources that has the front end expertise and relationships to develop and underwrite decarb projects and put that money to work. And so something we started on a while ago, paused as we were heading into this mayoral transition, but now the conversation is really being pushed because EPA has $27 billion to spend. Statutorily need to start moving that by February. Yeah. So this just kind of landed on my desk literally this week, that this new timeline. But luckily, we've already started, and we have a lot of learnings that I think can be foundational to some pretty significant programmatic investments.
We applaud you. Jessa and I are business owners, and we're in the B Corp world. And what's coming to mind to me is, yes, get the federal money. Yes, work with partners, and maybe consider that LA businesses should do like a 1% for the green fund, where 1% of their top line revenue gets contributed to this green fund, so that it's community finance from private businesses too, so that it's a collective effort and not just solely, relying on one funding stream, however massive it might be. We feel like getting businesses that's how you get consumers to participate. They go and they buy something, and a percentage of what they bought gets contributed to this green fund. And it's a way to have a little bit of a circular economy, not in the truest sense, but a little bit of a closer funding economy in LA. I think that would be an interesting idea if you haven't already thought about it. Yeah,
I mean, I think that I think that making things automatic, I think most people do, want this, right? Mm-hmm. I think most people do want better quality products. I think most people do want, cleaner air, but they don't really know where to start. So I like the idea of building it in. And I think that, there are some precedents for, crowdfunding and ways of people participating. But I think that, right now there's more cash out there than there are projects. I mean, that's just the situation. And when we talk about jobs and career pathways and all of that, I think we got that a little backwards on the last big infusion of federal money. There's all this emphasis on jobs, and I'm not saying that's not important, but we really need to figure out that pipeline of jobs and that pipeline of products for people to buy and support depends on a pipeline of projects. So, I think it's getting the policy right, getting the incentives right. So, carrots and sticks and removing barriers so that the projects can happen. And then the rest, we'll have, be in the tailwind, instead of the other way around, which I think was kind of unfortunate, but I think there were, a lot of lessons in that.
It's really, when you pointed out about kind of some of the conflicting goals, or the goals aren't necessarily aligned. Like I try to stay very on top of affordable housing and what's being done, to create more housing in California. And, then with the net zero goals, and, I'm thinking like 2050, the net zero goal for California. Mm-hmm. And there's like no alignment. And so hearing you point it out like that and say, well, these affordable housing developers, there's all these goals and cities and the state, they're putting all this money towards it, but there's no alignment with the big long-term goal and those shorter term goals that are solving a big immediate problem, which is also related to public health. And, when you talk about like Maslow's hierarchy, basic needs. So it's a very challenging issue. I am so glad to hear that people like you, who are incredibly intelligent and driven and motivated, can see all the pieces and are thinking about these like really big complex problems and how to put it together and come up with like a realistic, what I would consider sustainable and maybe regenerative solution beyond sustainability. It's very motivating when I'm sitting here thinking sometimes like, oh my goodness, like they're never going to fix this. And then you have all these ideas and you're talking about these things being underway, and it's very encouraging to hear.
I'm glad.
Well, thanks for joining us. I think this is a really good point for our wrap up rapid five.
Okay.
Yes. All right, Dave. What is your favorite daily habit?
Ooh, my favorite daily habit. I'll say it's daily, but I like to do my morning planning for the day on my exercise bike.
Oh, I like that.
Because I have two little kids, and so before and after school, my time is with them. And so, I kind of work that in the morning and, get a little exercise and get my kind of day figured out, is a great little hack that I figured out.
Nice. What are 3 things you would take to a deserted island?
Oof. My guitar, for sure. A mask and fins, and with some pencil paper.
All right. What is your favorite environmental policy?
Favorite environmental policy? I think, my favorite environmental policy currently is probably, New York's suite of policies. But, if I go back in time, I think then Mayor Bloomberg was really smart in the way that he used New York's ARA funds to establish the New York City Energy Efficiency Corporation, the New York City Green Bank. And, I'm really grateful to them, because they've been awesome mentors to us as we go through this planning exercise, to kind of do for LA what they've done for New York. So a little bit selfishly, but because it's helping me out now. But I also think that it was really, really smart the way that he looked at the real barriers. Reforming building code was another big part of that, and thinking about the set of policies, including the financing that would ultimately be able to transform the market there. I think was brilliant.
That's great to have a blueprint and find out what works, and no need to totally reinvent the wheel. Thanks for sharing that. What is your favorite flora or fauna?
I'll have to say the elk. I recently, I'm sitting in front of an LA background, but I lived in Colorado, as I mentioned, I think earlier, and I just love watching elk, in their environment. They're just so huge and majestic. But my earliest memory, I have to say a horse, because my first memory is my dad used to have a horse, and I was so little, I was riding on the pommel, my brother in the backpack. And so I just, the smells and they're just such, wise, peaceful, beautiful animals. So I'm going to change it from elk to horses.
Laurel is also a horse person.
I'm an equestrian. I feel you.
Oh, cool.
A horse person.
I know it's equestrian. I meant like you like horses, but yes.
You're a centaur?
Yeah, half
That's
horse.
why we're only in the top half on Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay. And the last one, if you could finish this sentence or thought, wouldn't it be cool if?
Wouldn't it be cool if? Wouldn't it be cool if everybody felt empowered to be part of this? If everybody felt that there's a future that's worth creating, and that's the work. I think we have the technology, we have the money. What we need is the motivation and the belief, in everybody, from the consumer to the investor, that there's a way forward here and that they have a part.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad we got to meet you. This won't be the last time you hear from us, I'm sure.
Cool. Well, this was fun. No, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to be updated when new episodes are released, and leave us a review to let us know what you think. It also really helps us to share the podcast with others who may enjoy learning about the environmental industry. If you want to submit a shout out or any feedback, please send an email or voice memo to podcast@califaep.org. The email again is podcast with an S, podcast@califaep.org.